What would a new college graduate that you worked very hard to recruit, they come in to your organization and sit down, and for their first week, they start learning your processes. What do they go tell their friends, and what do they think? Right? Put yourself in their shoes, and they are becoming certified in products and using products day to day in college, and they are the future of your organization, period. And what are their thoughts? Do they even want to hang around if they come in and see some things that don't make any sense?
Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm going to keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartman, founder and CEO of the Behind Your Back Sales Company, where it's our mission to help you sell more, faster, at higher margins, have more fun doing it. As for this podcast, we talk about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in this construction industry. I want to thank our friends at Capital One Trade Credit. If you are interested in selling more, faster, driving more revenue, while decreasing risk, you will want to check out Capital One Trade Credit and their state-of-the-art digital platform that makes it easier for your customers to buy from you. So check it out, Capital One Trade Credit. I'm excited to bring to you today my conversation with Miss Kendall Pouland. I'll tell you about the first time I ever saw her. I was at a board meeting in College Station for Texas A&M, and she got up to speak, and instantly I was impressed. And after she got done talking, I leaned to my neighbor and I said, "Who is that and what is her deal?" And this person raved about Kendall. So I went up to her later and I said, "Hey, I don't know you. I don't know what your deal is, but you got to come on the show." And that's where it started. Kendall graduated from Texas A&M University in 2003 with a Bachelor of Science in Construction Management, and then she joined Telepsin. She started as a PM, then became a Senior Project Manager, a Director of Professional Development, and then Director of Technology and Innovation before launching her own company about 6 months ago called Build Better Ways. And Kendall Pouland is an expert on something that affects every single person who's listening and every single organization. It's about process, how we manage change, drive innovation with physical structures as well as software and technology. So you are going to hear a lot of insights about change. And this is change at the executive leadership level, all the way down to the folks that are doing the job, getting it done with the boots on the ground. There is a very brief asking for a friend segment where I ask about a particular issue a friend of mine is having. And on the spot, she was instantly helpful. So I'm really excited. We're talking about a whole host of things, but really affect everyone, which I can't say for every single show that we put out, but this one for sure. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Miss Kendall Pouland of Build Better Ways. So Miss Kendall Pouland, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really excited to kind of talk more about your own journey within a large company with Telepsin. You started out changing the physical environment coming out of Texas A&M. You're a project manager, then you're a senior project manager. Then it seems like you were really focused on changing people in your director of professional development role. And then you moved into a role where you were changing through technology and innovation in a director role there. So lots of different ways to change. Maybe we'll just start out here. You can take it any way you want it. What are some myths and truths that you have learned the hard way? These are earned insights that you have about change in organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I think one myth that is very common and you hear all the time when you start trying to implement something new is We have these old guys that are, wiser and a different generation, and they are not going to be happy with it. And I have found that is not exactly true. I don't think it's necessarily generational based. I find that pretty much everyone is okay with change if they understand the benefits. Hopefully it's some benefits to them, but even if they at least understand the benefits to the organization and they really get why it's helping, they're actually pretty open to it no matter how old they are. And trust me, I've worked with every general superintendent, rough guy that you could imagine. And, they sound grumpy, but in the end, if they see that there's benefit to them or their people, they're on board.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've seen that too. And it's easy to say, well, Jim, he's happiest when he's unhappy. He was born during a night pour and he's just been frustrated ever since. And that's how he likes to be. He's not going to like any of this. And my approach has always been, I don't care who Jim is or who he isn't, but if there's an element of personal self-interest and he's rational, which let's assume he is, he's a leader in your organization, I think he's going to be open to it. But sometimes the person who shares that, I think it's an easy kind of scapegoat to be like, hey, listen, Kendall, I'm all in. But Jim, you got to watch out for Jim, so I'm not sure if now's the time or et cetera. So I love that. What, any other myths or truths?
So one truth that we all intuitively know is doing something big, like an implementation of some major change, requires planning. And you're thinking, well, duh, obviously. But sometimes we go into it and we may start with a plan and then we come down to the end where it's time to start rolling it out to people. And we haven't actually told anybody about it in advance. We've kept it to this little subcommittee that's doing it all the work. But we haven't thought through the long game where we need to start telling employees, slowly and in the right pace that this change is coming. We need to make sure we test it with this person over here that we didn't think about up front. We just assumed the lead project manager would get it. And that to me takes several leaders to be involved in that process, to think through it. I've never been in a room and not learned something when you bring somebody new to the table. They come in, you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And maybe we do that for business planning or, preparing to win a new project, something big, but we don't do it when it's something like implementing technology.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts because part of that sounds right, which is at the beginning, it's fragile. It's this idea. If we're not fully confident how we're going to roll it out, it makes sense to keep to a small group. And sometimes, right, the pace of business moves quickly. I often, as you were talking there, I was thinking just about this idea of internal marketing. A lot of times we're really focused on marketing and messaging to our external customers, but what about our internal customers? So maybe say more about that. Are there some first principles or some advice that you'd have to share with the audience when it comes to the speed at which, or maybe are there any common pitfalls? Say, hey, you don't want to find that you're 90% done with this and 7 people know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for one, nobody likes surprise unless it's maybe a birthday party. But when it comes to business, nobody wants to find out that you've been working for 6 months and now you're ready to roll it out and you haven't thought about how it affects accounting. And if it doesn't feel like accounting, if it feels like job cost or project management or something else, but then you find out later that there is a tie and you haven't even talked to accounting or HR is a lot of times got their fingers in everything in some way, but it feels like project management stuff. So you don't include them. You've really lost critical buy-in and you may have to go backwards a bunch of steps if you find that, oh my gosh, we didn't realize that was linked in that way. How are we going to do this? And it can delay the whole project. So at least you bring people in early, bring all the department heads in to go, hey, this is what we're thinking about. Do you care? Do you have any involvement? At least open the door. And maybe over the next week or month, as they're doing their regular processes, it'll come to them and they'll go, oh my gosh, wait, I didn't think about that. This pushes that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you singling out the HR department and accounting. And sometimes I found with purchasing as well, they seem like, well, they're not really part of this because this is another department where it is more direct. But to your point, those teams often are connected in somewhat non-obvious ways, but of course they need to be connected. So to bring them in early, at least say, hey, just a heads up. And I found if you can do that with leaders and say, hey, it's still new, but I want to make sure I was being courteous and thoughtful. And there's going to be things that you're going to be involved sooner or later. Keep it under your hat for now, but just get your wheels turning on how it might affect you. To your point, that can save so much time and rework during rollout for sure.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to read this quote to you from a friend of both of ours. This individual said that you are, quote, the most effective leader I've ever seen in her ability to communicate with one group, listen to what they're saying, digest it, and translate it to another group of people in order to drive change among a large group of people. And I asked this individual to kind of repeat it because those verbs in there I think are really powerful. Communicate, listen, digest, and then translate. So I'm wondering, is this a skill that you have developed over time? Because I think that the word translate, I'm seeing our world, a lot of times we're talking about Spanish, but it's two people that are saying the same things or trying to communicate, but they're not. And having somebody like yourself who's skilled and who can say, let me change this a little bit. I don't have to give you the whole thing, or maybe I can condense it, or maybe I have to expand it. Is this a skill that you feel to some degree you've always had, or throughout your career, have you intentionally kind of developed this?
That's interesting. I like that quote, and I think it is pretty true. I think every person has their own strengths and weaknesses, but for me, I've proven through personality tests and all that good stuff that I like people to be on the same page. And I do definitely want to hear one side and hear the other side. And it's amazing how there are ways where they always cross over. There's always places where they do agree. I can't say I was trained in any way to do this. Yeah, I think it is my personality trait in general that when I sit in a room, I want to figure out how we can get to the end together. And I don't want things to blow up. I don't think one person, should overwhelm the group with their ideas. I think it's important to call out people who aren't speaking up, to call them out by name, because they probably have the best idea in the group. They're just quiet, So yeah, I don't know how I got to that, but how I got to that skill maybe, but I do think that's really, really important to move forward as a larger group.
Yeah, well, I liked how you said, yeah, I think that is one of my strengths. And I found sometimes people are often their way too maybe deferential about some of their own strengths. And at the same time, I've met quite a few people who may have had dreams or ambitions about owning that and kind of doubling down on it and going out on their own, which you obviously have done successfully here while young with Build Better Ways. Was that hard for you to make that decision to leave, obviously, an organization that you were in several leadership roles, to bet on yourself and to go from a big corporate structure down to, hey, my own company? Was that hard for you?
Of course it was. And I'm sure anybody who has ever started their own company would say the same thing. I hope, or else you've got some balls of steel there. But so yeah, it was scary. I had a safety net. I had a 401k and I had medical insurance and I had friends. I mean, I was there for 18 years. And so that's where most of my friends came from in my adult life. And so it was very scary. I did a lot of research and I talked to a lot of people and then until I was fully bought in with my heart and my head, could I jump off that ledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll circle back. Before we go, we'll make it really abundantly clear. We'll pull out some more stories and insights before we make sure everybody can move on and connect with you. Because I've been really impressed with your writing, by the way. So we'll circle back to that in a minute. Let me ask you about this situation that I find somewhat often, and it's one of the biggest struggles that I have coming in from the outside, is when you do have individuals who are in executive leadership positions who are saying they want to drive change, who are saying they are willing to play a part in executing this change. And yet consistently over time, you're seeing that's not happening. And sometimes I feel like it's very obvious and it's intentional. In other cases, I'm not sure they're aware of it. It's the way they've operated for a long time. But then you find working for the leaders that are beneath them that are like, hey, we're working with so-and-so, but he's signing our paychecks. And by the way, Hartman, he's signing your paycheck. What have you learned throughout your career on how to hold executive leaders accountable when they're not following through on the commitments that they've made?
So let me start with what I think a lot of executive leaders, where they make the mistake and where they fall short when assuming that in the first scenario, they actually do want the change to happen. It's not just talk, but it's not succeeding. Executive leaders, ops managers, vice presidents, they don't have time to manage the process of implementing new procedures, new technology, whatever it is. There has to be someone else, someone at a lower level that is dedicated. It doesn't have to be 100%. It depends on the size of the project we're talking about. But somebody that it is now their job, and it is clear to them that it is part of their job to implement this new thing. And I think leaders, tell whoever they choose to help, you got to keep doing your projects. You got to keep building buildings. But hey, can you also, maybe help to do this other new thing? No, nobody has that time. Mm-hmm. You have to intentionally dedicate resources, whether that's, somebody's time, some money, a consultant, something to make that happen on the side in addition to their other work. And so take something away so that they can really focus on it. Maybe it's a committee. That's fine if it's a committee, but there needs to be a leader. You can't assign something to two people. I'm totally against that. But I think that's a big problem, is why leaders don't succeed at those things they claim they want done.
No, I think you hit on something really critical there, is that often the hard decision is that trade-off. It's easy to say, and we're going to do something else, and we can do this, and you can find time. And you know what they say, you find the busy person and give them stuff to do. But it's, what is this person not going to do from here on out?
Yep.
That often, kind of puts everyone back in their chair a little bit, because, right, we're taking something away to create, whether it's capital, talent, time, etc., for that. I wanted to get your thoughts. I think it's probably related to this, and maybe it's kind of taking a quick step back, but an important one is, part of your process is to understand, where are we now? What's the current state look like as a consultant? And maybe for our listeners who are internal there, are there any sort of pitfalls that you'd say, hey, when doing this, the most important thing is when we come out of it, we all look at this and say, we're all understanding reality clearly. Yet I've been involved as an outside consultant and inside, when we kind of get done and we say, here you go, this is what everybody thinks. This is reality. This is current state. And you have a couple people say, I'm not so sure that's true. Any advice on how to do that well?
So I think I've got an easy answer, although it's not an easy button, to figure out your current state, which is look at your manual, your standard operating procedures manual, whatever you call it. Maybe you've got a cute little name. Maybe it's just something that's out there. It may be in a 3-ring binder, a big fat 3-inch 3-ring binder. I have my opinions on that, of course.
What bigger ones? 12-inch binders?
Yeah, I love it. I love them because everybody's got a hole punch in their office. But I think that's easy, is to take a look at that and ask yourself a few questions. Is it all inclusive? What's missing? Do we actually have all of our processes here? And that doesn't just include project management, the golden child. It includes every other department as well. Is it up to date? When is the last time? What's that little date at the bottom right-hand corner of your printouts, right? Is it 2017? That's probably an issue. And so anything that hasn't been updated, have you literally not made any changes to your processes since then? Or did you just not update your manual? Is it more than just technical steps, which is something I see a lot of people do pretty well, is they may document with some screenshots steps 1 through 25 of how you write an RFI and track it.
Right.
But it's more than that. It needs to be, why is this important? Who are all the stakeholders? So there's a lot more involved than just the technical steps, which, somebody will get the subject matter expert to write down what are the steps required, but that doesn't get people really in tune to understand why they should do it and why it's so important to do it correctly. What else is in that manual? And I guess last thing, back to the binder comment, is it easy to access? If people are doing their jobs from the road or from a job site that hasn't, fully mobilized, can they go back and find all of those things? And I think that's a really good way to see if you are, what your current state is, and if it's behind, and if there's things that are really lacking.
I'm thinking back to we have some things we recently did, and we have obviously a very small team here, but I was saying it's like, as we're growing, we brought on some more people, we're looking to hire more. I said, are we doing this ourselves? But to your point, it is quite literally kind of step by step. And I kind of say, we want our benchmark is kind of the OTS, which is off the street. Can we get somebody off the street and get them in here? But I can guarantee you, because I just kind of looked at them and approved them, is that they didn't have the why is this important, like telling a story that will obviously have to be part of that. How hard is that or do you help, or for some of your clients that might be really good on the operational, here's the 25 steps, but what you're talking about is more, I would guess, is kind of capturing the hearts and minds and starting with why and all those sorts of things. I do think for many folks in our industry, that's a different skill set. How do you help make sure that is ushered across the finish line?
For sure. And I love the start with why. Simon Sinek is definitely one of my faves. But I think it's not hard. Okay. Right? It's not that it's hard. It is the matter that you have to stop what you're doing for an hour here and there and do the work. And I think those, you talked about those being, very straightforward people that it's easy to come up with the steps. I got to imagine that even just a 1 hour meeting, in their heads, they understand why it's so important. They're just not sitting down and putting it into a sweet little paragraph. But I think most people do understand why it's so important and what it can affect and what it does for the clients or internal customers potentially. But they're just not going to take the time to think through that.
Yeah. I know this will be a very broad question, but I'm thinking if the binders, the wide binders that we put up behind us and look real nice and no one touches, if that's not the way to go, my guess is if they're only purely digital and they get lost in the intranet with a million other files, that's probably not ideal. What does, and you can, again, I realize lots of processes for a lot of different things, but do you have an example of like, here's a good solution that kind of fits it ain't a binder, it's not digital only. What does that look like?
So, and maybe you're right. I would have been okay with digital only.
You would? Okay.
Yeah. In my past, it was on SharePoint.
Okay.
The beauty of SharePoint is it's flexible. It can be on the mobile app. It's obviously on your PC. Can you print it out? It may or may not look great. And so, yeah, for maybe those guys that just have to have at least their key things, they might want to print them out. And so those things should be separate file attachments, like with the step-by-step instructions, that kind of thing, so that it's really handy. And we've had plenty of people who print out their favorite things and maybe laminate them or stick them on their cork board or whatever. Right. But I just think in this day and age with people working from home, some part-time, working from the job site, if it's not digital and somewhere where it's easily accessible, and it's easy to search too, right? So the term I might use for procurement might be a different term that you use for the same thing. And so making sure that those keywords are all in there so that I can do a quick like Google search, or in the way kids say it these days, I can search it up. They can easily find what they're looking for, even if it's a different term than I'm used to using.
Yeah, that would take us down a rabbit hole, but understanding the nomenclature we use in different departments and how we all communicate, sometimes it's like, I don't know what that is. That's why I never use it. I never heard of it. And you're like, oh, what about this? You're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what it is. I use it all the time here. So it's like coming under some consensus about this is what we're calling this. These are the keywords, and here's why, and kind of repeating that.
For sure. But maybe if you go back to your term of OTS, if somebody comes in off the street and, it's their second week and they've been trained a little bit, but they've never seen that thing, they may have a different terminology from their past life too.
Yeah.
But I think that's a huge one. I love the OTS. That's a big deal. As people in construction tend to be a lot of type A's, some egos, and they want to be self-sufficient. And they should have that ability. And so if they have to rely on somebody else for them to ask questions and everything else, we also work really crazy hours sometimes. And so making sure those things are available for them to find out and learn on their own is really, really important.
Yeah. Let's talk about the all-important ROI, return on the investment. Do you have any maybe non-obvious examples or things that come to mind where on the surface, this might be tough to track an ROI on this, but you kind of found a creative way to do that? Because I find it's often there's disagreements, or we're like, hey, we believe it's the right thing. Let's not even worry about the ROI because it feels like the right thing. I'm like, well, quite frankly, if I'm coming in from the outside, you're paying me to be here. It's in our best interest if we find a way to do that. And sometimes you do have to get a little bit more creative. Anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, as with a lot of things in business, I think it comes down to people. And so one big ROI is turnover, disengagement, employee satisfaction. How does this terrible process cause all these problems? And if we had a better way to do it where people would be happier, more efficient, but efficiency is a little bit easier to calculate. But just thinking through, if we lost one person for every 100 times that this happened, what does that do? Or if somebody does this 50 times and suddenly decides they don't like their job, they keep doing it, but they're disengaged, what is that costing us? And so I think that's a creative ROI to think through for a lot of these. Time searching for information, and that can be upper level management who has to read 7 different reports, and click through all 15 projects to find the information. Or it could be someone in the field, that spends 45 minutes looking for that photo, when if they'd done it a better way, it would have been there. And so time wasted looking for information or documents is sometimes forgotten. We waste a lot of money in this industry expediting materials because we didn't plan in advance. We didn't see this coming around the corner. Nobody knew that the lead time was XYZ. And some of those things are impossible to know, especially today. But some of those things could be avoided. And so you're paying a lot of extra to expedite. And that's real dollars.
Yeah, you're right. Well, and obviously the supply chain issues are well known in our industry. However, if I still hear someone complaining about, 42-week lead times on Windows, I'm like, this isn't new. It's been like this, but like, I know, but it shouldn't be. I'm like, it should or it shouldn't is not the question. It's been consistent, and for some reason it seems to be getting worse. We should be updating our mental models about scheduling, about how this stuff works, right?
Right.
The other thing I really love there is on some of these small searching for this or how long this takes, I find that people have an idea in their head or they become so accustomed to just doing it. They're confident how to do the process, but it's absurdly long. And I've just done like super niche time studies of when you have to find this document or complete this process. It's only 3 steps. You can do it right from your desk and you do it 20 times a day. Do you mind if I just clock you? And I literally break out my phone and do it, and then you do the math. And she's like, yeah, it probably just takes me 2 minutes. And you're like, it took you 7.
Yeah.
And
times 20.
But then also now we can really quantify that. So I love that. As you're thinking about the tech implementation process and you have, prepare, plan, and implement, where do you see the greatest risk of failure or drop off or inertia? I'm sure each one has its own kind of creative ways to throw us humans off our trail despite our best efforts. But was there any specific or common pitfalls that you would say is, if someone told me that, hey, during this sequence, they ran into issues and I had to guess which one it is, this is the one that I would think would be most attributable to that.
This may not be what you expect, but I think it is the very beginning that people just start the process of that whole implementation purchase of new software. They see a couple really great demos, and then they start to understand what it's going to take to actually get to the finish line. And somebody tells them, it's going to take 6 months, right? It's going to take X amount of man hours. And of course, there's dollars. But I think people get so overwhelmed at the very beginning that it never gets off the starting block.
How do you get around that if someone comes to you and say, hey, this is really critical, but, right? Especially now, everyone's always busy, but there are some really unique challenges and frustrations and stresses that people are facing today. How might you approach that to kind of get through the beginning?
So I am a very, very tactical, action-oriented person. And I come from the construction world. And so a Gantt chart is the answer to everything.
All right, there you go.
And so literally a checklist, a Gantt chart of what it's going to take. I think breaking it down into those little manageable bites, common saying that you eat an elephant one bite at a time. I use it all the time. And I think that takes away the fear of, okay, in week 1, all you have to do is this little piece. Week 5, all you have to do is this little piece. And to me, that's how you sell leadership. That's how you sell it downstream as well, that this may look really intimidating and really time consuming, but we're just asking for 2 hours a week or whatever, you come up with, and don't rush it. Don't try. I hear all the time, like actually this week that, we heard the implementation takes 12 months, but we are better than that. And we're going to do it in 6 months. BS. You're not going to do it right. Listen to the people who've done this before. It takes a lot, but do it at the pace that makes sense for you and chunk it off.
Yeah. Tempering that overconfidence, as we know, it's always nice when you can say, guess what? We finished early. Congratulations, guys. As opposed to doing what we normally do in construction is we got to push it way back. That overconfidence at the beginning, or just the sheer fear. But I love that too. We recently were doing something and I was feeling the stress of it. And I just kind of came to the realization there was no Gantt chart. There's no critical path. I said, well, we know when we got to deliver it. Let's just work our way backwards. And once you saw, you're like, okay, all right. And it takes some of that, just the fear, the unknown out of it. Let me ask you this. I'm sure we could kind of characterize this as asking for a friend here. Asking for a friend. Hypothetically, maybe you ran across somebody and we were chatting and I said, I know it sounds crazy. No one in our audience has ever done this or experienced this, but we've invested in the software. We got it going. It was providing some value. We realized we are using maybe 5% of its capabilities and we're just currently stuck. It's there. I like it, but we are not using this thing anywhere near to what it could really do. And this is why the reason we invested in the first place. What initial questions might you ask to help someone in the situation get unstuck?
Yeah, that never happens.
Never happens.
You're alone. Or your friend, I'm sorry, your friend is alone.
Right.
So one is, what is your relationship with the vendor? There are a lot of vendors that will provide weekly, quarterly, yearly updates, check-ins. And so I think you might as well use that resource. They are the experts. So I would certainly look into that. I would also ask, who is the subject matter expert at your company in this program? Do they know that they are the champion? Like, have they been deemed the champion, or are they just, the only one that seems to care? But tell them that they are very important and that you want them to spend some of their time, not just doing their day job, but also take a little time out of your week or month to research, to learn, because a lot of times once it is implemented, nobody's in charge of it anymore. Right. Maybe you have an IT guy and y'all think it's not IT's job ever. it's always the actual end user. So unless it's an IT process, it's an end user that needs to be involved. And I would say just don't assume that they know that you want them to spend some of their daytime working on that. And then there's always all of these newsletters and blog posts that come out, LinkedIn posts that come out from the vendors. And, once you're a year in an implementation, you stop caring and stop reading. And so that can be a really good resource to at least go, oh, you know what? We found a workaround for that when we first implemented, and now they've fixed it. And you didn't even know it because you don't read their newsletter, which I don't blame you, but make sure somebody, is watching that.
Well, I took some good notes here. I'm going to relay this to my friend. I immediately like, love it. I know what this friend will do next. So thank you. That's great. Relationship with the vendor. And I think when you say that, I'm like, of course, this company is huge. And I'm sure if we call it, they have a ton of resources, right? But also, what's the relationship with the vendor? Who's the subject matter expert? And for me, for my friend, he needs to delegate this. And you're right. I get regular updates via the newsletter, and it's good content. So that's great. I'm glad I asked for my friend here. Let me ask you about something that's a little bit harder. Is I kind of call this the Sherlock Holmes dog that didn't bark case, which they were trying to figure out if this robbery happened, why wouldn't the dog bark, right? Why wouldn't he go crazy? Sometimes it's a struggle when you'll have someone reaching out and say, Kendall, we really need help with this. And it's a bad process and this is the outcomes. And someone says, well, if it's so bad, how did we just have our best year ever? How was retention so high? How is profits high? Like, how do you drive a sense of urgency when you look around and theoretically all everyone sees or most people see is success? How do you drive that?
So I think one question to the leader is how long is the status quo going to be okay? Is it okay for 1 year? Is it okay in 10 years that we're still doing the status quo? And I think you start thinking, what software, and this is not all about software, but what software were you using 10 years ago? Can you picture it? And like it looked like DOS, right? And so if you continue doing what you're doing today and don't change, you're going to look like that in 10 years. And that's not what anybody else is going to look like. I think another good question is, what would a new college graduate that you worked very hard to recruit, they come in to your organization and sit down, and for their first week, they start learning your processes. What do they go tell their friends? And what do they think? Right? Put yourself in their shoes, and they are becoming certified in products and using products day to day in college, and they are the future of your organization, period. And what are their thoughts? Do they even want to hang around if they come in and see some things that don't make any sense? If they see that there are no processes in place, that there's old school templates that don't make any sense anymore, you need to be impressing them because they are the future.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I'll hear this often is that they'll say, hey, at the end of the day, our people are our only differentiators. And it's this combination, it's this teamwork, and it's this culture. I think I might know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, Kendall. Can internal processes actually be a differentiator that creates some sort of competitive advantage?
So I've thought a lot about this, and surprisingly, my answer is no. Your process for whatever, project startup, for submittal processing, for meeting minutes, whatever those things are, no individual process is your differentiator. I guarantee you, and I've talked to a lot of construction companies, other people are doing it generally the exact same way. What's important is that you have all of those resources are, hitting their potential. Maybe nothing's ever maxed out or finally improved, but everything is doing really well to a point where your people are now they have efficient processes. They have good and accurate information. They have professional reporting, and all of those things that come out of good processes turn into people that are trustworthy, that are confident, that are knowledgeable, and that's your differentiator, is those people. But you got to back the train up and look at what got them to that point.
Yeah, that's really well said. Well, I'm watching the time here, Kendall. Before you go, I do want to ask you about books. Books still are a really good way to kind of share ideas. Is there any sort of book that you've read recently, or you think about kind of your career, that said, this is a book that I'd really recommend, or that's kind of germane to the conversation that we've had?
So this probably doesn't apply to, every listener, but I've read The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster by Darren Hardy. And it's one of few books that I have listened to more than once. It's, it's all about the ups and downs of starting a company, but it brought me through questions that I had going through it and gave me the confidence to get where I am today.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm not familiar with the book. I am familiar with Darren Hardy and am a fan. I also find with those, especially for our sales folks and our business development and occasionally leaders, when you read a book that is for entrepreneurs, there's a lot of similarities of people doing, kind of going their own way and kind of feeling some of those same feelings. So I do feel, I'm excited. I'll check it out to see if that's true. But I also think this idea, especially in our industry, of adaptation, investing in new technology, having this be a skill where we can adapt quickly and do new things. Fundamentally, there's some entrepreneurial thinking that goes into that. So sometimes when you have a title like that, you'll have people like, not for me, been here for 18 years, ain't going anywhere, not interested. I'm like, well, not so fast. So that's great. We'll make sure we link to that in the show notes. I want to thank you. Thank you for coming on. I've been looking forward to talking to you because it's such a huge issue. And I know our clients deal with it. We deal with it. Everyone's dealing with these processes, and how can you continually sort of investigate how are they working? How do we continue to change? Where can people learn more about you? Do not be bashful. Do not be subtle. Let people know like where they can learn more about you, and especially make note. I've printed this one out. This article you wrote, it was short. I thought it was really well done, but nobody in parentheses else likes change. Where can they find all this information?
Yeah, awesome. So my website is buildbetterways.com. I am specifically focused in the construction area, so that's why I named it that, and all about getting better all the time. I'm also on LinkedIn, Build Better Ways. But the best way is, to contact me through one of those sites, and then let's just talk. Let's just have a short conversation, for 30 minutes or an hour, and talk through, what do you feel like you're struggling with today? And you probably already know those things. I don't necessarily have to tell you everything, but I will ask a lot of questions. So be prepared for that. But, there's a chance that I'll go, you are good, or you need a specialist in one specific thing. And I will be very honest with you and let you know that. But I just love having those personal conversations of let's talk through it. And what does that look like? And how can we potentially, take you to the next level where you feel more comfortable with where you're at in your organization?
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I think it's a good spot to end. And I'm going to, again, thank you for coming on the show. And also thank you in kind of preparing for this and talking to you. I've learned a lot from you that we've applied in our business. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
As always, my friend, thank you for listening. Our goal here is to make this the best podcast you listen to. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows, or potential guests, or any other sales fundamentals issues that you are dealing with. Do not hesitate to email me directly at bradley@behindyourbacksales.com, or link up with me on LinkedIn or at Instagram at the handle BehindYourBackCEO. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Capital One Trade Credit. If you, my friend, think that driving more revenue and increased cash flow with decreased risk on an incredible digital platform to make it easier for your customers to buy from you, well, you might want to check out Capital One Trade Credit. We will close out like we always do. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first.